Hi, my name is Tanisha King. I am a Metro State University student. This is a formal presentation for the course called Health Disparities in the United States. I am doing a formal presentation on a research paper that I wrote called Am I My Brother's Keeper? Health Disparities in the African American population. My topic focuses on the history, the present state, and possible resolutions to the health disparities within the African American population. It goes into detail for a brief detail on the Civil War and the emancipation of the slave. It talks about basically some things to highlight, just how chaotic it really was. Remembering that African Americans were not considered human beings in a sense, or they weren't considered human beings for a long time. They were treated as animals, and so now today we're faced with health disparities within this community, and it would be a fail on anybody's part to not look at the history and understand the thought process of the African American, the great disadvantage that the African American community has had to come from and where they're at now. And so this paper really highlights different scenes and situations, such as the smallpox epidemic that really killed a large amount of African Americans due to unsanitary environments when the slaveholder who no longer could hold slaves just tossed them out on their butts, kicked them out, and was like, bye. Nothing, not even necessarily clothing on their backs or shoes on their feet. And I mean, even to the point where men were fighting war, forced to fight war without shoes on their feet in cold winter weather. So this paper highlights different scenes and historical facts from that era, from that portion of our history, and then it correlates it to our health issues now. Not only the psychological effects on the African American, because currently, in the current state that we're in, we have the African American community and police brutality or racial profiling. And while on the outsider's mind view, this is just whatever, but for a person who's living this is embedded in their mind. This is things that can stress a person out. When you go to work, when you go to an interview, when you go to pursue anything, when you go to the store, you still, as an African American, have to think of those things. You have to think of how you're going to be perceived and how you portray yourself. So this paper really does highlight the history behind the African American, especially on the Civil War and the emancipation of the slave. This research paper correlates to the course study as far as first of all, it's a specific and direct lesson that was taught within the course, and it just goes in a more depth description of what was talked about in the class. One of the things that really brought equality and equity, or equality versus equity, home for me was this paper and doing the research on it. And while I am African American, sometimes you don't, in this course, you're learning these different terms and these different policies and whatnot. And it's like when you're actually doing the research, it definitely brings out the fact that African Americans, you have two podiums, and they're all at the same level, but you've got a very short person on the same podium as this very tall person on the same size podium, And so the short person, as is described in the course, can't obtain the view that the taller person can. And it's the same thing with the African American uh, community and the health disparities, in that you have to remember there's been years, decades of research that has been done on behalf of the Caucasian group of people to better their health. Uh, and even to the detriment of African Americans. Um, and then as far as African Americans, there's really very little study that has been done on the African American, and which is sad, because as my paper highlights, how you've got the Caucasian are at the top of the totem pole. Then you've got the Hispanics, and then you've got the African Americans. We are a minority. African Americans are a minority. So, I shouldn't say we, but African Americans are the minority, are a minority, and yet they count for the majority of health disparities within our system. They have, while Caucasians and African Americans both have cancer as a leading cause of death, African Americans have a higher rate of death due to cancer than Caucasians. Diabetes, same thing. Yet, while I didn't include this research paper or this research article in my paper, there was a research article that was written on diabetes and the genetic coding, what it has as, does it have an effect on diabetes, and not one subject was African American. So my paper focuses more on just the history and the studies, the clinical studies, the research that has been done, and the different acts that are being put in place to try to help the health disparities within the African American community. But as far as how this relates to the class, it definitely is in direct correlation with the course, as African Americans are one of the groups that was mentioned in the course with health disparities. And you get a lot of the facts and stuff from the lecture notes, as far as the heart disease, cancer, and depression. Those statistics were in the class notes as well. So that's one portion of it. And then as far as what would help resolve the situation, the health disparities in the African American community, again, it's more research needs to be done. It's great that these things are being looked at now and highlighted, and like, well, we really got to fix this. But yes, more research, just as I have mentioned that research study that didn't include one subject, and diabetes is one of the leading causes of death in African Americans. And so for there not to be for there to be even a study and not include an African American is just crazy. But again, more research, more clinical studies, and also on our parts, whether you're a healthcare worker or anyone, just as individuals, we need to learn to be more empathetic, to be more considerate of those around us, whether or not we can relate or understand where they're coming from. Just as my paper is entitled, Am I My Brother's Keeper? Yes, we are our brother's keeper. And if one falls short, that affects us. That affects the overall population. So at the end of the day, we all have the same type of blood running through us. And we have to realize that. And we have to realize that we're not in this for one race or two races. We're in this for the whole human race. And so, all in all, I would say that as we draw closer to trying to resolve health issues, period, in the United States, I think it is of great concern that we really do look at the African American history, the psychological issues that affect African Americans, and remembering that this is what the paper that I wrote about was. It's specifically on African Americans, because that's not to or discount any other race. Every race is important. And again, like I said, this is the whole human race, and if one group of people are suffering, then we all suffer. And so that is the main focus. And as we go in to try to resolve the issues of the human race, we must dissect and pick apart and really understand each group of people's suffrage and ailments and diseases and mindset as far as healthcare is concerned. Thank you. And as far as my references go, I have references from the Jim Downs Sick from Freedom 2012, African American Illness and Suffering During the Civil War and Reconstruction. You can get a lot of the population differences as far as Caucasian, Hispanics, African Americans, Asians, Native Americans are concerned off of the United States Census Bureau at www.census.gov/quickfacts. Also, I mentioned the psychological issues that are placed on the African American, and that was from Carton A, How Slavery's Legacy Affects the Mental Health of Black Americans, New Republic. And also in the lecture notes, there's some more things as far as equality and equity that was definitely in the lecture notes as well. You can get that there. And as far as recommendations go, the clinical studies that are being placed and different recommendations that have been put out there, I have The Health of African American Community in the District of Columbia, Disparities and Recommendations by Jackson, 2016. And that is from the Georgetown University of Nursing and Health Studies. Thank you. Have a good day.